Greetings to those who watch below. Really hope you guys had a fantastic holiday season. Things have calmed down a bit here now, so been able to find a bit of time to do some recording. I do have some amazing news to share with you before we carry on with today's video though. Coming next year, I and one of my friends will be bringing you a brand new experience. It's called the Dark Times Podcast. And what we'll do is every 2 weeks, me and my fellow co-host will get together and each tell each other a scary story about a creepy event or a creepy place in this incredible world that we have. Think of it like My Favourite Murderer mixed with the paranormal sense of spirits or The Last Podcast on the Left. More details will come to you as soon as I can give them to you, so make sure to keep an eye out for that. Continuing with today's video, we're going to go back to Manen Lyset's little project, where he is documenting people's Canadian paranormal encounters. This one comes from a work friend of his, and is known as the Spectres of Spark Street. I was out to lunch with my colleagues the other day, and asked them if they'd ever experienced anything paranormal. When they asked why I was asking, I started to explain my project, but you know how conversations with larger groups of people go. Tangents come in like tides and drag topics to a watery grave. Someone said something about writing back in college, and then someone else made a joke about construction, and splash, there goes my sandcastle. As we were walking back to the office, Dan crept up behind me. Boo! He was cheerful, as he always is. He gestured me to come closer, so I stood on my tiptoes to bridge the distance. In a whisper, he proceeded to tell me he had a story for my little project. It's a creepy one, he said, but you can't tell a soul. Well, that kinda defeats the purpose, I replied. He laughed and said I could share it, just not with anyone from work. No one's gonna believe you anyway, he added. We'd just reached the office by that point and were running a little late, so he told me to come get him during break time. A few hours later, we were sitting by the fountain in the atrium, and he told me this story. Dan had been out with friends one evening in Ottawa about a month ago. He was admittedly a little tipsy when this happened, but nowhere near blackout drunk. He was a couple of beers in when one guy suggested they migrate to a pub a couple of streets down, where they made better wings. Being a wing connoisseur himself, he enthusiastically approved of the change in venue. The group paid their bill and staggered out the door. They were at the intersection of Sparks and Metcalfe, headed down Sparks towards Bank Street. I've personally walked that stretch of road a million times, and I can tell you from experience, it's only a 5-minute walk. 8 if you're a little drunk. 10 if you're really drunk and have a limp. Between points A and B, there's just one other intersection, and that's Sparks and O'Connor. Point being, it's a very short, very easy distance to traverse, sober or otherwise. Plus, since Sparks is a shopping street closed to anything but foot traffic, it's also pretty safe. Dan was lagging behind as the group arrived at the intersection of Sparks and O'Connor. He said he never actually saw the street sign, but there was really no other intersection it could have been. Like I said, there's just one street between Metcalfe and Bank, and that's O'Connor. His buds crossed the street just as the pedestrian light flashed red, and he got stuck on the other side. He wanted to run over, but there was a car roaring its engine impatiently, so he waited and pulled out his phone, sending his friends, and I quote here, dank memes. You know, so they wouldn't miss him during his short absence from the group. From the corner of his eyes, he noticed the white flash of the crosswalk signal activating, and sprinted across the street while fumbling to turn off his data plan. When he finally looked up, now on the other side of the intersection, he was stunned to find his friends weren't there waiting for him. Thinking they'd gone ahead, he peered farther down the street to find them, and instantly felt his stomach drop. That whole stretch of Spark Street was completely empty. Not just devoid of his friends, but also of any other passer-by one would normally find meandering around at that hour. His stomach's second bottom, a secret trapdoor bottom only he knew about, gave out as he realised he couldn't recognise any of the buildings either. Some buildings were larger, some shorter, some wider, some narrower. Where there had been a patio with chairs earlier that very same day, there was now a large man-made hole and digging equipment. Instead of the Tim Hortons where he got his coffee in the morning, there was an abandoned-looking store, taking up the space of 2 Tim Hortons. The gym was no longer a gym. It was an empty space obscured by scaffolding. None of the streetlights were on. All of the businesses looked vacant. Less closed for the night vacant. More abandoned for 20 years vacant. At first he thought it was construction rearing its ugly head again. They're building a light rail transit system in the area right now, so it's not uncommon to come to work one morning to find your street blocked off for construction, then go home that evening and find a big hole at another intersection. Construction explained the change in scenery, but not his missing friends. He looked around for any sign of them, listened for any drunken laugh, but got nothing. He pulled out his phone to text them, but he'd somehow lost his signal in the middle of downtown Ottawa, where even the crappiest service providers reached. What else could he do but keep walking and hope to rejoin them on Bank Street? It was just 1 block, just 1 block away. He quickened his pace, but as he did, more buildings came into view replacing the ones he'd passed. There were far too many buildings for the small stretch of road he was on. Long past where Bank Street should have been, there were bistros, gift shops, restaurants, none of which he recognised, and all of which were empty and abandoned. Some of the signs had fallen off, some of the awnings were torn in two, and some of the doors were wide open and hanging off their hinges. He glanced behind him, and could only see more buildings stretching out into an infinite void. Confused, Dan stopped and asked himself the questions you'd expect someone in this situation to ask. How much did I have to drink? Is this a dream? Did someone spike my drink? As he pondered these things, he noticed something in the window of the nearest storefront. From the look of the empty and cracked displays, it seemed to have once been a jewellery store, though there wasn't even the smallest trinket left. Square in the middle of its large store-wide window was a figure standing in the darkness, black eyes shining like a cat's in the night. Dan felt the cold grip of fear wrapping around his throat as he tried to avert his gaze, but found himself incapable of breaking his stare. It was only when the hairs at the back of his neck started to prickle from an increasing fear that something was standing behind him that he managed to turn away. When he saw the dozens of silhouettes staring back at him from the storefronts on the other side of the street, he wished he hadn't turned at all. They were everywhere, behind every window, standing at every door, sitting on every rooftop, indistinct and uniform, melting into one another's shadows, except for those big black eyes locked onto him and him alone. Dan sprinted down Spark Street, trying to get away from the Spectres, but with every step they seemed to get closer. No longer content with just standing behind the windows, they began appearing on terraces, benches, next to statues. They'd move without movement, like animations in a flipbook, with batches of missing pages between the actions. The street went on and on, the figures coming closer and closer, until he could feel a breath right at the back of his neck. Panting breathlessly, Dan closed his eyes, swallowed hard, and ran blindly. The honk of a car horn made his eyes shoot open. He stopped so abruptly that he nearly gave himself whiplash. The car drove by, momentarily illuminating the street signs: Bank Street, Spark Street. He turned around, and there was the Tim Hortons, the gym, the usual stores with their normal wares in the windows. and most importantly, his friends. "What the hell, man? How'd you get there? I thought you were behind us," one of them said. They all looked pretty confused. He tried to explain what happened, but they were a little too drunk and way too loud to listen, so he just followed them to the pub and ate his wings in peace. Here's the thing. I couldn't tell if Dan was being serious or not. He had this big old grin on his face the whole time, like he always does. But I must admit, it was a little more strained than usual. I don't know if what he said is even possible, but I think about it every time I need to walk down that part of Spark Street, and I usually wind up going one block further down to avoid it now, just in case. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel. And even if you're already subscribed, make sure to hit the notification bell. That way you will know whenever a new video comes up on the channel. And more importantly, you'll be one of the first people to know more information about the Dark Times podcast coming 2019. So, until next time, sleep tight.